They laughed when the CEO asked him to translate. But the janitor who barely spoke English was about to uncover a crime worth millions. The 42nd floor of Vail International was never meant for people like Lucas Moreno. It was glass and steel, all sharp lines and muted colors. The kind of place where your footsteps sank into carpets so thick they seemed to swallow sound. The night shift usually left it even quieter, a hollow echo of boardroom power, except for the low hum of the janitor's buffer machine and the occasional sigh of the HVAC system. Lucas liked it that way. After years in the Navy, noise made him restless. Silence gave him control again. Tonight, the building's polished corridors reflected the faint glow of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Somewhere far below, New York's traffic roared like a distant ocean. He was working his way down the main hall outside the executive conference room, mop in one hand, bucket rolling beside him, when the door behind him hissed open. "Hey, you!" The voice was clipped, impatient. Lucas turned. A man in an immaculate navy suit stood framed by the doorway. His hair was silver at the temples, his tie knotted with military precision. Lucas recognized him instantly from the framed magazines in the lobby. Adrian Vail, CEO of the entire empire. Lucas straightened instinctively. "Sir?" "You speak Tagbanwa? Or something like that?" Vail asked, waving a sheaf of papers as if the words on them were gnats he couldn't swat away. Lucas blinked. "Close. I know some Tagbanwa script, but that's old. Why?" Vail stepped aside, revealing a cluster of board members and executives inside. The room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and anxiety. A huge digital clock on the wall ticked down toward midnight. Someone muttered about a deadline. "We've got a contract here," Vail said, "written in a dialect our legal team can't untangle. You were in the Navy, right? Something with shipping?" Lucas hesitated. "Yes, sir. Naval Transport Unit." "Good. You're in." It wasn't a request. They ushered him in. Lucas felt every eye in the room pin him like an insect under glass. The walls were a smooth gray, the table a slab of dark oak. At the far end, Monica Hale, Chief Operations Officer, leaned back in her chair with a smirk that didn't bother hiding its disbelief. "You're kidding, Adrian," she said. "We're letting the janitor translate?" A ripple of low laughter went around the table. Lucas felt the old reflex. Chin down, take the hit, keep moving. But Vail cut the noise with a sharp look. "Time is money. He either helps us or we lose the deal." Lucas took the papers. The text was dense, printed in a looping hand that looked ceremonial at first glance. But as his eyes traced the lines, muscle memory stirred. In the Navy, he'd handled port manifests from the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, documents riddled with codes disguised as shipping schedules, codes only certain officers could read. This contract wasn't just about goods and delivery dates. Symbols were embedded in the margins, tiny, almost decorative marks that would look meaningless to anyone else. To Lucas, they were coordinates, not of offices or warehouses, of sea lanes. He set the papers on the table, flattening them with his palm. "Sir, these aren't just legal terms, they're instructions." "Instructions for what?" Vail asked. Lucas's throat went dry. "Maritime routes, cargo transfers, and some of these, they're not standard. They bypass registered ports." Daniel Cross, the company's internal counsel, leaned forward. "Bypass?" Lucas nodded slowly. "It's a way to move cargo without triggering customs flags. You disguise it as a transfer between company divisions at sea. No port, no inspection." Monica gave a sharp laugh. "Or maybe you've been watching too many conspiracy shows." But Daniel didn't laugh. His eyes narrowed at the page, then at Lucas. "Where did you learn this?" Lucas hesitated, weighing what to reveal. "Navy transport. Once you've seen how smugglers hide in plain sight, you don't forget the patterns. Vale tapped the table. Translate it. All of it. Now! Lucas worked through the document line by line. The language shifted between a local dialect and a trade pidgin, peppered with archaic terms that masked the real meaning. It was slow, painstaking work, but the map it painted was undeniable. Routes threading through Southeast Asia, touching ports in Cambodia and the southern Philippines, then vanishing into international waters. When he finally set the papers down, the room was silent. "This isn't a supply contract," Lucas said. "It's a playbook. Someone's using your company's shipping assets to run unlisted cargo. Whatever's in it, it's not meant to be found." Monica's smirk had vanished. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Moreno." "I'm not accusing," Lucas said evenly. "I'm telling you what's on the page." Vale's gaze was unreadable. He reached for the papers, flipping through them again as if the words might rearrange themselves into something harmless. "Daniel," he said at last, "I want you to cross-check this with our Southeast Asia contracts. Quietly." Lucas took that as his cue to leave, but before he could step out, Daniel's voice stopped him. "Moreno, if I send you more documents, could you look at them?" Lucas studied the lawyer's face. Daniel's tone was low, but there was something sharp in his eyes, an understanding that this was bigger than a mistranslated clause. "I can," Lucas said. Daniel gave a curt nod. "Then we'll talk tomorrow." Lucas left the conference room and stepped back into the corridor, the hum of the city still pressing through the glass. His mop and bucket waited by the wall like loyal dogs. He gripped the mop handle, but his mind was far from cleaning floors now. The coordinates, the bypass routes, the way certain codes had been underlined twice. It all felt too familiar. He rolled the bucket toward the service elevator, the echo of boardroom laughter still in his ears. Years ago, on a humid night off the coast of Luzon, he'd seen similar markings on a manifest. The cargo had been sealed in unmarked containers. 2 weeks later, 3 men from his unit were dead after an accidental fire aboard a civilian vessel they'd been escorting. The official report had been thin, the cause labeled undetermined. But Lucas had never believed in coincidences at sea. Now, here in the glass towers of Vale International, the same patterns were back, hidden in plain sight, dressed up in legalese, and someone had just handed him a reason to dig deeper. In the service elevator's narrow mirror, he caught his own reflection. The same close-cropped hair, the same set jaw, but older now. More lines around the eyes. He thought of his son, asleep miles away in their small apartment. The Navy had taught him discipline. Civilian life had taught him caution. But some instincts never died. Tonight, something had shifted. The war he thought he'd left behind might just have followed him home. Lucas barely slept that night. The city's noise faded with the hours, but his mind stayed alert, looping through fragments of the contract. Each coded coordinate, each abbreviation that didn't belong. He sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment, the only light coming from a single lamp with a dented shade. Beside him, an untouched cup of coffee went cold. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound until the soft patter of footsteps came from the hallway. His son, Mateo, appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in a dozen directions. "You're up early," Lucas murmured. "Had a bad dream," Mateo said, curling into a chair. Lucas reached across the table, ruffling his hair. "Dreams can't hurt you." But the truth was, it wasn't nightmares that worried him. It was the kind of threats you couldn't see until they were already in motion. By sunrise, Lucas was walking through the lobby of Vale International again, this time in his plain work clothes but with a folder tucked discreetly under one arm. He had written down everything he remembered from the previous night, symbols, ports, cargo notations, in the same shorthand he'd used in the Navy. Daniel Cross was waiting for him in a small corner office on the 38th floor. The lawyer's tie was slightly askew, dark circles under his eyes telling Lucas he'd been up just as late. "Close the door," Daniel said. Lucas obeyed, taking the seat opposite him. Daniel slid a stack of documents across the desk. "These are internal shipping schedules from the last 18 months. Different division, different cover companies, but..." He tapped the top page. "I think they're part of the same pattern you found." Lucas opened the folder and felt his gut tighten. There they were again. Strings of letters and numbers that looked random to anyone else but read like coordinates to him. A few matched exactly with locations from the previous night's contract. Others were new, but the method was the same. Indirect routes that made cargo vanish off the official map. He traced a finger along one entry. "This one, Siargao to Tawi Tawi. No reason to go that way unless you're avoiding a checkpoint." Daniel nodded. "That's what I thought. And this?" He handed over another page. "It's from a subsidiary registered in Malaysia. I cross-referenced it with shipping logs from the Port Authority. The vessel never arrived where it was supposed to." Lucas looked up sharply. "So where did it go?" "That's the question," Daniel said. Lucas leaned back, mind turning over possibilities. "It's the same playbook I saw when I was in. Smugglers using corporate fleets. Only this time the paperwork is cleaner." Daniel's jaw tightened. If this is true, someone in upper management is either blind or complicit, and I don't think Adrian Vale is blind. A voice drifted from the hallway. Monica Hales, sharp and dismissive. "Daniel, we have a board call in 10 minutes. Daniel lowered his voice. "Keep this quiet. If Monica catches wind, we could both be out before we have anything solid." Lucas stood, gathering the papers. "Send me copies. I'll decode them at home." As he stepped into the hall, Monica swept past in a tailored suit the color of gunmetal, her perfume cutting through the air like the blade of a knife. She gave him a glance that was more calculation than curiosity, then kept walking. Back in his apartment that night, Lucas spread the documents across the table. The pages made a loose map of Southeast Asia, each line of numbers a thread connecting distant ports. He began cross-referencing with an old Navy notebook he'd kept, a forbidden souvenir from his service days. The patterns emerged slowly, like ink seeping through paper. Certain ports repeated every few months. Others appeared only once, always in connection with ships that changed names mid-route, a classic smuggler's trick. Halfway through, Lucas froze. One of the cargo codes, HBX 472, jumped out at him. He had seen it before. Years ago, in a manifest stamped confidential during his last deployment, that exact code had been tied to a container supposedly holding construction materials. But the whispers on the ship told a different story. Illegal arms destined for a conflict zone. He ran a hand over his face. This wasn't just smuggling. It was the same network. The next day, Daniel called him into the parking garage after hours, the echo of their footsteps carried under the concrete. "I found something else," Daniel said, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a single sheet, an invoice for special freight services, routed through 3 shell companies. Lucas scanned it. The destination coordinates were buried in a decorative border at the bottom. "They're not even trying to hide it well." Daniel's mouth twisted. "They don't have to. Nobody here knows what to look for, except you." Before Lucas could reply, his phone buzzed. No caller ID. He answered, and a low, distorted voice filled his ear. "Stop digging, Moreno." His pulse spiked. "Who is this? You want to see your son again? Drop this, now." A click. Silence. Lucas's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles whitened. He looked at Daniel, who had read the truth in his face without hearing a word. "They mentioned Mateo?" Daniel asked. Lucas nodded once. Daniel's jaw clenched. Then this isn't just corporate corruption anymore. It's personal. That night, Lucas sat in the dark, the city's glow filtering through the blinds. He replayed the call in his head, dissecting every word. The voice had been careful. No accent he could place. No background noise to give away location. But the threat had been clear. He pulled open a drawer and took out a small wooden box. Inside was a Navy-issue compass, a photograph of his unit, and the watch of Petty Officer Harris, the man who died in that suspicious fire years ago. Lucas turned the watch over in his palm, feeling the weight of old promises. He had sworn, after leaving the service, never to walk back into shadows like that again. But now, those shadows had found him, and they had reached for his son. 2 days later, Daniel handed him another batch of documents. This time, Lucas worked through them in the back corner of a quiet diner, coffee cooling beside him. By the time he was done, a clear picture had formed. The routes led to a company in Southeast Asia, a subsidiary Vale International publicly claimed had been inactive for years. But the shipping logs told another story. The inactive company had been moving cargo regularly, using routes Lucas knew were favored by black market arms dealers. He closed the folder and leaned back, the din of the diner fading around him. Somewhere, someone inside Vale International had built a pipeline for smuggling, hidden behind legitimate trade, protected by legal paperwork, and invisible to anyone without the right kind of eyes. And now, for the first time in years, Lucas knew he was in the middle of something big enough to change everything. The rain came sideways that night, driven hard by wind that rattled the glass of Lucas's small apartment. The storm blurred the city lights outside, turning them into streaks of gold and white. Inside, the living room was lit only by the shifting blue of the television. Mateo, asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket with a comic book resting on his chest. Lucas stood at the kitchen counter, a shipping manifest spread before him. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, but he hadn't noticed. He was tracing the web of routes again, this time focusing on a single path that seemed to appear and disappear across different documents. A chain of coordinates snaking from the southern Philippines to a free trade zone in Singapore, then vanishing into international waters. The code marking the route, HBX 472, stared back at him. It was the same code from Harris's last mission. The one that had ended with a fire, 3 body bags, and an official report that said nothing worth remembering. The vibration of his phone on the counter snapped him out of the memory. A new email. No sender, no subject, just an image. He tapped it open. It was Mateo. The photo had been taken from across the street, his son walking home from school, oblivious to the lens trained on him. Across the bottom of the picture, in blocky white letters, was a single sentence. Stop, or you'll lose him. Lucas's first instinct was to grab the gun he kept locked in a metal box under his bed. His second was to burn the phone entirely. Instead, he took a long breath, forcing his heartbeat down from its hammering pace. Whoever had sent this knew exactly where to hurt him. He glanced at Mateo, still asleep. The boy had no idea that the shadows of Lucas's past had found their way into their quiet life. The phone buzzed again, this time a text from Daniel. Need to meet. Urgent. Parking garage level B2. Now. The air in the garage was damp and smelled faintly of oil. Daniel was already there, leaning against his car, a leather folder in hand. I've been digging, he said without preamble. The routes you marked? They all lead to a single corporate entity, a shell company registered in Batam. And guess who owns a controlling interest? Lucas crossed his arms. Vale International? Daniel shook his head. Not officially, but one of its offshore subsidiaries. It's buried so deep that even the accountants here probably don't know. Lucas frowned. What's the cover business? Marine equipment, harmless on paper, but the shipments are too regular, too well-timed. This isn't spare parts, it's high-value cargo. And the kicker? The company's listed contact in Batam is a man named Luis Cordera. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. I know that name. From the Navy? Lucas nodded. Cordera ran logistics support in Southeast Asia. But everyone knew he was dirty. He had friends in the black market, maybe higher. Last I heard, he vanished after an internal investigation. Daniel handed him a printed manifest. Cordera's name is on this shipment leaving next week. Same route, same code. Lucas studied the page, then looked back at Daniel. They're not just moving cargo. They're moving something big. The next day, Lucas went through his cleaning rounds as usual, but his eyes were always scanning. The cameras in the halls, the guards by the elevators, the faces of people who didn't belong. On the 42nd floor, he paused outside the boardroom. Voices carried through the heavy door. Make sure the Southeast Asia contracts are finalized by Friday, Monica Hale was saying. We can't afford delays. Another voice, Vales, cut in. And the manifest codes? They've been updated, Monica replied smoothly. Our friend in Bottom confirmed the routes are clear. Lucas moved on before they could notice his shadow under the door. That night, his laptop pinged with a secure message from Daniel. It contained a series of satellite images, fuzzy but clear enough to show the outline of a cargo vessel mid-ocean. The date stamp was last month. The ship's name had been painted over, replaced with something else in sloppy white letters. Daniel's note underneath was brief. Tracked this vessel using your coordinates. It docked in Batam, unloaded at night. No customs. Lucas sat back, staring at the images. The lines on the water, both in the literal shipping lanes and the metaphorical ones he'd been tracing on paper, were converging on the same point. And then he remembered something else. On his last deployment, there'd been a sealed crate with the same manifest code, HBX 472, escorted with more security than a head of state. It had been loaded onto a civilian freighter under the cover of darkness. No paperwork anyone could see. No explanation. 2 weeks later, Harris was dead. The more Lucas dug, the clearer it became. This wasn't a new operation. It was an evolution. The same network, restructured, using corporate respectability as a shield. By Thursday, he was ready to confront Daniel with what he'd pieced together. But when he arrived at their usual diner, Daniel was already waiting with a grim expression. You're not going to like this, Daniel said. I've been warned off, directly. Monica cornered me in the elevator and said, and I quote, tell your janitor friend to stay in his lane, or the next spill he cleans up will be his own. Lucas's jaw tightened. Then we're close. Daniel slid another document across the table. This came through an internal whistleblower. It's a shipment schedule. Your HBX 472 is on it. The cargo leaves Batam in 4 days. Destination listed as Corporate Research Site, but the coordinates land in open water. Lucas stared at the page, every nerve in his body taut. That's a mid-ocean transfer. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Which means whatever they're moving never touches a legitimate port. Lucas closed the folder. We can't wait for them to slip. We need proof before it leaves Bottom. Daniel's expression was grim. And how exactly do you plan to get that? Lucas didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the shadows that had already reached for Mateo, about the email with his son's picture. If they were willing to threaten a child, they wouldn't stop at that. Finally, he said, We find Cordera. He's the link between the Navy routes and Vale's operation. If we can get him to talk... Daniel raised an eyebrow. You think he'll just confess? Lucas's voice was flat. I think he remembers me. And I think he owes me his life. The rain had stopped by the time Lucas walked home, but the streets still glistened under the street lamps. He kept scanning for tails, a habit from the old days. A black sedan slowed briefly as it passed him, then kept going. When he reached his apartment, the hallway was quiet. Too quiet. Inside, the lights were on, and Mateo was sitting at the table, a stranger standing behind him. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket zipped to the neck. His hands rested lightly on Mateo's shoulders, but there was nothing casual about the grip. "Evening, Moreno," the man said. Lucas's pulse roared in his ears. "Let him go." The man smiled faintly. "We just wanted to remind you, lines in the water can be cut." Lucas took a step forward. The man's grip tightened. Mateo flinched. "4 days," the man said. "Stop asking questions." Then he was gone, leaving the door ajar and the faint smell of cologne behind. Lucas locked it, pulled Mateo into a hug, and felt the boy's small frame trembling against him. The lines in the water weren't just on paper anymore. They were here, in his home, wrapping tighter around his life. And he knew. Breaking them was going to cost more than he'd imagined. The apartment was still when Lucas woke, but it wasn't the peace of safety. It was the quiet of a battlefield, before the next shot is fired. Mateo had gone back to sleep in his room after the encounter the night before, but Lucas hadn't slept at all. He'd sat at the kitchen table, a glass of water untouched, listening to the building's pipes groan and the occasional hum of the elevator shaft. Each sound made his shoulders tighten. The stranger's words had been simple. Stop asking questions. But they carried the same kind of warning Lucas had heard in war zones, from men who didn't bluff. And the worst part was that this wasn't a war zone. This was his home. He opened the wooden box he kept hidden at the back of the closet. Inside, wrapped in a strip of old Navy canvas, was a single sheet of paper yellowed with age. It was a cargo certificate, stamped and signed by a man Lucas once trusted with his life, Commander David Rains. The date on the paper matched the last mission of Lucas's Navy career, the one that had ended Harris's life. The mission had been classified at the time. They were ordered to escort a civilian freighter, the Solace Dawn, carrying what the manifest listed as construction materials and relief supplies to an island devastated by a typhoon. Lucas remembered the smell of the rain on the docks in Manila, the heat pressing through his uniform, and the way the crate marked HBX 472 was guarded like it contained the crown jewels. Commander Rains had stood on the pier, signing off on the cargo. His signature was quick, mechanical. Lucas hadn't thought much of it then. Rains was always precise, efficient. But 3 days into the journey, there had been a fire. It started in the lower hold, where the HBX crate had been stored. The blaze spread too fast, too hot for something carrying cement and steel beams. Harris had gone below deck to help contain it. He never came back. The official report claimed electrical failure. But Lucas had smelled the truth in the smoke. It had the acrid bite of chemicals, the kind used in munitions. When they returned to port, Rains told Lucas to forget it. "Some things are above our pay grade, sailor," he'd said, his eyes hard in a way Lucas had never seen before. 2 months later, Rains was dead. "Car accident," the Navy said. No funeral Lucas could attend. Just a folded flag in a box sent to his family. Now, years later, the same code, HBX 472, was alive again. Lucas turned the certificate over in his hands. Rains's signature was bold, unshaking, but in the lower corner, barely visible unless you knew to look, was a set of markings Lucas had never noticed before. Not letters, not numbers, symbols. The same kind of embedded marks he'd seen in the Vail International contract. His chest tightened. Rains hadn't just signed the cargo certificate, he had approved a smuggling run. And if the network operating now was the same one from back then, that meant Vail International's operation wasn't some opportunistic side hustle. It was the continuation of a pipeline that had survived years, maybe decades, by embedding itself in legitimate trade. Lucas's phone buzzed, pulling him back to the present. A blocked number. He hesitated, then answered. The voice was the same distorted one from before. "I see you're still digging." Lucas didn't reply. "You think you're chasing a company," the voice continued. "You're chasing history. And history doesn't like to be exposed." Then, softer, almost like a dare. "Ask yourself, why did your commander sign off on something that killed your friend?" The line went dead. Lucas's first instinct was to call Daniel, but he stopped himself. The walls were closing in. Someone was monitoring his every move, and involving Daniel Moore might just paint a target on his friend's back. Instead, he dug deeper on his own. He spent the morning on an old Navy contact forum, scrolling through usernames until one caught his eye. Seadog 74. It belonged to Evan Rourke, a federal agent now, but once a customs liaison who'd worked with Lucas's unit in Houston to shut down a smuggling ring. Lucas sent him a simple message. "Need to talk. Old case. HBX 472. The reply came within an hour. "Meet me tonight. Pier 14. Alone." The wind off the East River was sharp that evening, cutting through Lucas's jacket. Pier 14 was quiet, except for the groan of ropes against pilings and the distant hum of the city. Evan was already there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the shadows. He looked older, more worn, but the edge in his gaze was the same. "You're lucky I still remember that code," Evan said without greeting. "HBX 472 crossed my desk once. I flagged it, got told to drop it. The next week, the file vanished from our system." Lucas told him everything. Vale International, the contracts, Cordera in Batam, the threats against Mateo. When he finished, Evan's jaw was tight. "This isn't just smuggling," Evan said. "This is a hybrid network. Military contractors, corporate fronts, and enough political cover to make it untouchable." Lucas took a breath. "What about Rains?" Evan hesitated. "Off the record?" He wasn't dirty at first, but at some point, he got leaned on, hard. Whatever they had on him was enough to keep him in line until the end. And when he stopped being useful, Evan's voice trailed off. Lucas didn't need him to finish the sentence. On the walk home, the city felt different, closer, more hostile. Every set of footsteps behind him made him glance over his shoulder. He thought about the stranger in his apartment, the photo of Mateo, the voice on the phone. He thought about Rains signing that certificate with steady hands, knowing what was inside the crate. By the time he reached his building, the decision was made. He wasn't just going to follow the lines in the water, he was going to cut them, but first, he had to protect Mateo. That night, he packed a small bag for his son. "We're taking a trip," he told him. "Where?" Mateo asked, confused. "To stay with Uncle Ray for a few days," Lucas said. Ray was an old Navy buddy who lived upstate, far from the city and far from anyone who might be watching. "It's just for a little while." Mateo didn't argue. He'd learned early that when his father's voice carried that quiet edge, it was serious. By dawn, Lucas was back in the city, walking into Vale International for his shift. He moved through the hallways like any other night, mop in hand, eyes down. But his mind was already on the next step. Cordera was the key. If Lucas could reach him in Bottom before the next shipment left, he might find the proof he needed to burn the network down. He knew it wouldn't be simple, but neither was war. The 42nd floor was never silent during the day. Phones rang, heels clicked across the polished floors, and the low murmur of deals in progress filled the air like the hum of an expensive machine. But when Lucas stepped off the elevator that morning, the sound shifted. Conversations dropped, eyes tracked him. He knew that feeling. In the Navy, it was the moment before a disciplinary hearing when rumors spread faster than facts. Here, it meant someone had been whispering his name in the wrong rooms. He kept walking, pushing the janitor's cart, until Monica Hale's voice cut across the hall. "Moreno, step into my office." Her corner suite was all glass and steel, with the skyline laid out like a private painting. She sat behind a desk free of clutter, her jacket draped neatly over the back of her chair. "Close the door," she said. Lucas complied, standing with his hands at his sides. Monica didn't look up from the folder in front of her. "You've been asking questions about contracts outside your pay grade." "I've been translating documents when asked," Lucas said evenly. Her eyes lifted to his. They were cool, precise. "Don't insult me. You've been in Daniel Cross's ear. You've been pulling old shipping records. You think I don't notice the janitor suddenly playing investigator?" Lucas didn't flinch. "I think the company should know if its assets are being used illegally." She leaned back, smiling faintly. "You think you're the first one to stumble onto something and grow a conscience? Let me give you some advice, sailor. Corporate waters are rougher than the seas you sailed, and people who can't swim—" She let the pause stretch. "Drown quickly." Lucas didn't move. "If you're threatening me—" "Oh, I'm not threatening," she said, her smile sharpening. "I'm promising. You have a son, don't you? Mateo, right? 11 years old. Nice kid. Be a shame if he got caught in the undertow." The air between them went razor thin. Lucas's hands tightened at his sides, but he kept his voice calm. "Leave my son out of this." Monica's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Then leave my business out of yours." By the time Lucas returned to his cart, his chest felt like a coiled spring. He pushed through the rest of the morning in silence, watching the hands of the wall clock crawl forward. At lunch, Daniel found him in the service corridor, his expression tight. "They're moving against you," Daniel said in a low voice. "Monica's already told the board you've been accessing confidential files without authorization. She's painting you as some kind of rogue operator." Lucas gave a humorless laugh. "She's setting me up." "It's worse than that," Daniel said. "This morning, a recording surfaced, audio of you supposedly saying you'd take Vail International down if it's the last thing I do. It's fake, but it's convincing." Lucas's stomach turned. "Where did they get it?" "No idea," Daniel said. "But once it's in the board's hands, it's as good as gospel." Lucas thought of Monica's measured smile, the way she'd spoken Mateo's name like a weapon. "She's not just covering her tracks, she's making me the fall guy." That evening, Lucas was emptying trash bins in the boardroom when his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Board meeting tomorrow. You're on the agenda." Attached was an audio file. Lucas hit play, and his own voice filled the room. Only it wasn't his. "Vail International's dirty. I'll expose every shipment. I don't care who gets hurt." It was seamless, no hesitation, no audio glitches. Deepfake tech had gotten better since his military days. But hearing himself say words he'd never spoken still sent a chill through him. The message came with one final line: "Run while you can." The next morning, Lucas entered the boardroom knowing he was walking into an ambush. The long table gleamed under recessed lighting, each leather chair occupied by someone with the power to end his employment. Or worse. Adrian Vail sat at the head, his expression unreadable. Monica sat to his right, calm and poised, a tablet in front of her. "This won't take long," Monica began, her voice measured. "Mr. Moreno has been found in possession of confidential documents, has been recorded making threats against this company, and has repeatedly overstepped the bounds of his position." She tapped her tablet, and the audio file played for the room. Heads turned toward Lucas, some with shock, others with thinly veiled contempt. Lucas waited for the recording to end before speaking. "That isn't me." "Of course you'd say that," Monica replied smoothly. "But the timestamp and location data match your phone." Lucas kept his gaze steady on Vale. "Sir, I've served my country. I've worked here quietly for years. The only thing I've done is point out that one of your contracts contains smuggling codes. I can prove it." Monica's tone was almost pitying. "Or maybe you planted them yourself to manufacture a scandal." Daniel spoke up from the far end of the table. "That's ridiculous. He wouldn't even have access to—" "Sit down, Daniel," Monica said sharply. Vale raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough. This isn't a court of law. It's an internal matter. Monica, I trust you to handle it." The meeting adjourned without a vote, without a defense. Lucas returned to his locker to find it already open, his few possessions stacked neatly in a box. His access badge lay on top. A security guard, one he recognized from the lobby, stood nearby. "Sorry." "Man," the guard said quietly. "Orders." Lucas carried the box out into the damp afternoon air. The clouds hung low over the city, the streets reflecting the silver light. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Daniel. "Meet me at Pier 14. Bring what you have left." At the pier, Daniel was waiting with a small device in hand. "It's a clean phone. No GPS, no tracking." He handed it over. "They've locked you out of every system. And I'm hearing rumors they're feeding your name to federal investigators as part of a rogue smuggling probe." Lucas stared at him. "They're making me the smuggler." Daniel nodded grimly. "And if they succeed, you'll take the fall for the entire network." Lucas glanced out at the dark water. "Then we have to move faster. Cordera leaves Batam with HBX 472 tomorrow night. That's our last chance to get proof before they bury me." Daniel hesitated. "I can get us into the internal database, but it's risky. We'd have to break into the secure server room." Lucas's mouth set into a thin line. "Then we do it tonight." That night, as the city pulsed with neon and traffic, Lucas slipped through a side entrance of Vale International with Daniel. They moved in the shadows, avoiding cameras, climbing the maintenance stairs to the restricted server floor. Daniel worked quickly, his fingers flying across a portable terminal. "Almost there," he muttered. "Once I pull the transport logs, we'll have dates, routes, and cargo IDs, enough to burn this whole thing down." Lucas kept watch at the door, every muscle coiled. Somewhere in the building, Monica was probably sipping a glass of wine, confident she'd erased him from the board. But he wasn't gone. Not yet. The server room on the 39th floor was colder than Lucas expected. Rows of black metal racks stretched out like narrow alleys, each humming with the pulse of hidden transactions, secrets, and lies. The air smelled faintly of ozone and chilled dust. Daniel crouched by a terminal, his portable drive tethered to the system with a thick cord. Lines of code flickered across the screen, tracing their progress as they burrowed deeper into Vale International's core data vault. "2 more minutes," Daniel murmured. Lucas kept his eyes on the doorway, listening for any shift in the building's mechanical hum. Every sound was amplified in the cold silence, a fan spinning up, the creak of metal under the air conditioner's vibration. Then, from somewhere below, an elevator door slid open. Lucas straightened, his pulse quickening. He heard the muffled thud of footsteps, deliberate and slow. "Daniel," he said quietly, "we've got company." The lawyer's fingers didn't stop moving. "Almost there." The footsteps grew louder. A shadow passed the frosted glass window outside. Lucas's grip tightened on the heavy flashlight in his hand. It wasn't a weapon, but it would have to do. Then the terminal beeped. Daniel yanked the drive free, tucking it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Got it. They slipped out a side door, taking the emergency stairs down. The building seemed to shift around them, lights dimming in some halls, flickering in others, as if someone was manipulating the power. When they reached the loading dock, a single figure was waiting. The security guard from the lobby, the one who had apologized when Lucas was escorted out. His face was tight, eyes darting toward the security cameras. "You need to go. Now." "What's going on?" Lucas demanded. "They took your kid," the guard said in a low voice. "Mateo. 2 guys grabbed him outside your friend's place upstate. Dropped a message at the desk. If you want him alive, you bring that drive to Pier 9, midnight." Lucas's stomach dropped. "Who?" The guard hesitated. "One of them was in uniform. Navy. Older. Said you'd remember him." Lucas's mind clicked through a dozen faces until it stopped cold. Petty Officer Kyle Mason. The man he'd once dragged out of a flooding corridor during a typhoon, back when they were both green in the service. Mason was supposed to be retired. They left the building without a word, slipping into the dark streets. Rain had started again, fine and cold, soaking through Lucas's shirt. In Daniel's car, the lawyer gripped the wheel hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "If you hand them the drive, they'll kill you both anyway." "If I don't, they'll kill him for sure," Lucas said flatly. Daniel shot him a glance. "We can get Evan involved. He has federal pull." Lucas shook his head. "Evan's too far, and if this thing's as deep as we think, we don't know who to trust in the chain of command." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Then we go together, but we don't go in blind." They spent the next 4 hours in Daniel's apartment, spreading out maps of the docks and satellite images on the kitchen table. Pier 9 was a half-abandoned freight terminal, technically owned by the city, but leased to a private logistics company, one that appeared in Vail International's offshore portfolio. Lucas studied the layout. One main entrance. Back is fenced and wired. If they're holding Mateo there, he'll be in the central warehouse. It's got a mezzanine, easy for a sniper to cover the floor. Daniel frowned. "That's oddly specific." "I've been in that building before," Lucas said. "Training exercise years ago." He tapped a point on the map. "There's a drainage tunnel here. Leads under the yard to the east wall. If we can get in unseen, we'll have a shot." By 11:45 p.m., they were crouched in the shadows of the tunnel's mouth, the rain masking their approach. The drive was in Lucas's pocket, wrapped in waterproof tape. Inside, the air was damp and metallic, the faint drip of water echoing against the concrete. They moved in silence, Lucas's hand brushing the cold wall to guide them. When they emerged at the far end, they were behind the warehouse. Through a crack in the corrugated metal, Lucas saw a rectangle of light, an office inside the building. 2 men were there. One, broad and square-jawed, wore a dark jacket over civilian clothes. The other, Lucas recognized instantly. Mason. The years had deepened the lines on his face, but the set of his shoulders was the same. He was speaking to someone just out of view. Then Lucas saw him. Mateo sitting in a chair, hands bound, eyes wide but dry. The boy's chin lifted when Mason spoke to him, and Lucas felt a surge of pride even through the fear. They slipped inside through a maintenance hatch, the noise of the storm covering the metallic creak. Moving between stacks of crates, Lucas signaled to Daniel to circle toward the office while he stayed low on the floor. When he was close enough to hear their voices clearly, the words were like acid. "Don't like this, Mason," the other man was saying. "Why not just kill the kid now?" "Because," Mason replied, "Moreno saved my life once. I'm giving him a chance to buy it back. After that..." He shrugged. Lucas's grip tightened on the flashlight in his hand. Daniel made the first move, cutting the power to the office with a flick of a breaker. The lights died, plunging the warehouse into darkness. In the confusion, Lucas moved fast, crossing the floor in a low sprint. He reached Mateo, pulling the boy into a crouch. "It's me, quiet now." Mateo nodded, his breath quick. A shape loomed in the dark, Mason moving toward them. "You should have stayed out of this, Lucas." Lucas rose, stepping between Mason and the boy. "And you should have stayed the man I thought you were." Mason's voice was flat. "That man doesn't get to eat. This one does." The next seconds blurred, Mason lunging, Lucas sidestepping, the flashlight cracking against Mason's arm. Mateo bolted toward the crates, Daniel appearing out of the shadows to grab him and pull him clear. Mason recovered fast, drawing a pistol from his jacket. The muzzle swung toward Daniel and Mateo. Lucas didn't think. He slammed into Mason, the gun discharging into the rafters. They went down hard, sliding across the concrete. The fight was short and ugly. Lucas's Navy training clashed against Mason's, each man anticipating the other's moves. But Lucas fought with something Mason didn't have, a son watching from the shadows. When Mason went down for the second time, gasping, Lucas yanked the pistol away and leveled it at him. "You're going to tell me who you're working for." Mason spat blood, smiling faintly. "You already know. You just don't want to believe it." Footsteps echoed from the far end of the warehouse, more men coming. Lucas grabbed Mason by the jacket, hauling him halfway up. "Who?" Mason's answer was a whisper. "Same man who signed your last orders in the Navy." Lucas's grip tightened. "Raines is dead." Mason's smile widened. Then it must be his ghost signing the checks. They slipped out through the drainage tunnel as shouts rose behind them. By the time they reached Daniel's car, Mateo was shivering but unhurt, his small hand gripping Lucas's tightly. Back in the safety of the apartment, Daniel locked the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. "We still have the drive, and now we have a name, sort of." Lucas looked at Mateo, then at Daniel. "We're not stopping. Whoever's behind this, they were in my life long before Vail International. This isn't just corporate. This is personal." And as Lucas laid the pistol on the table, the weight of it felt like the past itself, cold, unrelenting, and impossible to ignore. The city was still wet from last night's rain, puddles reflecting the pale dawn light like broken mirrors. Lucas hadn't slept. He sat at Daniel's kitchen table with a mug of coffee gone cold, the drive they'd stolen lying between them like an unexploded mine. Mateo was asleep in the guest room, Daniel's old Navy blanket tucked up under his chin. Every few minutes, Lucas glanced toward the closed door, reassured by the silence. Daniel came in, tie undone, eyes shadowed. "We can't sit on this. Every hour we wait, but they get closer to locking down the network or moving the cargo." Lucas tapped the drive with a finger. "We can't just drop this on the wrong desk. Whoever's pulling the strings has reach. Mason as much as told me the same people were involved in my last Navy mission." Daniel poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "So who do you trust?" Lucas's answer came slowly. "Evan Rourke. We worked together years ago in Houston. He's federal now, doesn't take orders from the same chain these guys are in. If anyone can move without tipping them off, it's him." Daniel nodded. "Call him." Evan answered on the second ring. His voice was cautious but steady. "Moreno, I figured you'd be calling after Mason's name came up." "You heard about that?" Lucas asked. "I hear about everything that smells like the same cargo pipeline we tried to kill a decade ago. Where are you?" "Lower Manhattan. I have proof. Transport logs, manifest codes, satellite data, enough to open a case." Evan paused. "Then we don't talk on the phone. Meet me in 2 hours. Pier 14. Lucas ended the call, then looked at Daniel. "We're moving." Pier 14 was a different beast by daylight. Fishermen hauling in nets, gulls wheeling overhead, the air thick with brine. Evan was waiting near the far end, a hood pulled up against the wind. He looked older than Lucas remembered, with streaks of gray in his beard, but his eyes were still sharp. He took the drive without a word and slipped it into a secure pouch. "You weren't kidding," he said, after skimming the file directory. "This is enough to start a full-scale seizure, if we can tie it to someone with a name and a face." Lucas told him about Mason, the kidnapping, and the whisper about Commander Raines's signature. Evan's expression darkened. "That explains a lot," he said. "We've had pieces of this operation flagged for months, but every time we move in, it's like they're 3 steps ahead. Now I know why. They've got ex-military feeding them intel from the inside." Daniel crossed his arms. "So what's our move?" Evan glanced toward the water. "The HBX 472 shipment leaves tonight. They'll try to push it through international waters before we can seize it. If it gets past the 12-mile limit, it's gone." Lucas's voice was quiet but firm. "Then we stop it before it leaves port." By mid-afternoon, the 3 of them were holed up in a windowless storage office near the docks. The walls were lined with charts, port schedules, and satellite images. Evan worked the radios while Daniel set up a secure link to an off-site data server. Lucas stood over a map of the harbor, marking entry and exit points. "If we jam their port clearance signal, the ship can't legally depart. That buys us time to get federal agents on site." Evan shook his head. "They'll have countermeasures. And Monica Hale's people have enough sway to get the Port Authority to wave them through anyway." Daniel looked up from his laptop. "What if we get the proof in front of someone higher? Someone who can't be bought before the ship leaves?" Lucas frowned. "And how do we do that in the next 6 hours?" Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. "We put it on every screen in the building, internal, external, boardroom feeds. If the evidence leaks before they can contain it, they'll have no choice but to act." The plan was risky. It meant breaking into Vail International again, this time in broad daylight, uploading the files directly into their internal broadcast system, and routing a copy to the federal network. Evan was blunt. "Once you do this, there's no walking it back. They'll come at you with everything they've got." Lucas met his gaze. "They already took my son once. I'm not waiting for them to try again." They moved just after 4 p.m. Slipping in through a service entrance Lucas still had a key for. Inside, the corridors hummed with the end-of-day rush. Assistants carrying armfuls of files, executives murmuring into Bluetooth headsets. They reached the server hub without incident, Daniel sliding into the chair at the main console. 3 minutes, he said, plugging in the drive. Lucas stood guard, his eyes on the hall. Every sound, footsteps, elevator dings, tightened the coil in his chest. Then he heard a voice that froze him in place. "Going somewhere, sailor?" Monica Hale. She stepped into view, flanked by 2 security men in dark suits. Her smile was thin and cold. "I warned you once. You didn't listen." Lucas's reply was calm, almost conversational. "You should have made the threat without touching my son." Her eyes flicked to Daniel, who was still typing furiously. "Pull the plug." Daniel didn't look up. "Almost there." One of the guards stepped forward. But Lucas moved faster, slamming the door shut and locking it. "You've got 60 seconds, Daniel. Make them count." The seconds felt like hours. Outside, Monica's voice was muffled but sharp, ordering the guards to break the door. The metal shuddered under their blows. Daniel hit the final key and yanked the drive. "It's done. Internal broadcast, federal upload, public mirror server. They can't stop it now." The door gave way. Lucas grabbed the nearest chair and shoved it into the path of the first guard, buying just enough time for Daniel to slip past. They ran, weaving through service corridors until they spilled out into the loading dock. Evan was waiting in a black SUV, engine running. "Get in!" As they pulled away, Lucas saw it happen. The giant digital display in Vail International's lobby flickered, then filled with scrolling manifests, satellite images, and coded coordinates. Every screen in the building showed the same thing: proof of illegal shipments, complete with Monica Hale's name and signature on multiple documents. Pedestrians stopped to stare. Employees came to the lobby, whispering furiously into their phones. In the SUV, Evan's radio crackled. "Federal agents en route to Dock 6. Repeat, Dock 6. Vessel HBX 472 under seizure order." Daniel let out a slow breath. "We did it." But Lucas didn't relax. Not yet. They reached the port just as the evening fog rolled in. Dock 6 was a hive of motion. Cranes moving containers, forklifts buzzing across the yard. The HBX 472 vessel loomed in the mist, its hull dark and massive. Evan pointed toward the far side. "That's where they'll try to make a break for it, if they get into the channel before the agents arrive." Lucas was already moving. He sprinted across the yard, weaving between stacks of containers until he reached the mooring lines. With practiced hands, he pulled the release on one of the lines, forcing the crew to halt loading operations. Shouts rang out in the fog. A spotlight snapped on, sweeping across the yard and fixing on him. From the deck of the ship, a figure appeared, Adrian Vail himself, flanked by armed men. His voice boomed through a loudhailer. "Moreno, you're finished," Lucas called back, his voice steady. "So are you." In the distance, sirens wailed. Red and blue lights cut through the fog as federal vehicles swarmed the dock. Agents in windbreakers spilled out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Adrian's men froze. The moment broke like a snapped rope, chaos erupting as the feds took control. Lucas stepped back, breathing hard, as Evan moved in to oversee the seizure. Daniel came up beside him, a grim smile on his face. One step closer. Lucas didn't answer. His eyes were already on the horizon, where the water turned dark under the setting sun. The battle for the shipment was over. But the war for the truth, the one tied to Rains, to the ghosts in his past, was only beginning. By dawn, the story had already exploded. Every major outlet had footage from the Vail International lobby, those giant screens flickering to life with manifests and satellite photos, Monica Hale's signature glaring in block letters. Overnight, the HBX 472 vessel had been seized under federal order, its crew detained. Lucas watched it all from the worn couch in Daniel's apartment, the early morning news casting blue light across the room. Mateo sat beside him, knees tucked to his chest, trying to follow the fast-talking anchor. Sources inside the Department of Homeland Security confirm the investigation is expanding. Vail International has not issued an official statement, but sources close to the board say CEO Adrian Vail is cooperating fully. Lucas muted the television. "That's the first lie of the day," he muttered. Daniel walked in from the kitchen, coffee in hand, looking as though he hadn't slept at all. "You need to see this," he said, passing Lucas his phone. It was a press release from Vail International, slick, carefully worded, and dangerous. Vail International condemns illegal actions of former employee. The statement painted Lucas as a disgruntled ex-janitor who had fabricated and planted falsified data to manufacture a false scandal. It claimed he had a history of insubordination during military service and was now under investigation for possible involvement in the illegal cargo seized last night. They'd even included a still frame from the deepfake recording Monica had played in the boardroom, Lucas's face frozen mid-sentence, his mouth forming words he'd never spoken. "They're going to turn you into the story," Daniel said grimly. "Not the smuggling. You." Lucas rubbed a hand over his face. Then I go from witness to suspect, and anyone who helps me becomes an accomplice. By midday, the smear campaign was everywhere. Social media lit up with split-screen images, Lucas in his janitor's uniform beside headlines like, "From Mop to Mob?" Talk radio hosts speculated about his mysterious Navy past. It was working. The same neighbors who'd once nodded at him on the street now glanced away. A man at the corner store muttered "traitor" under his breath as Lucas passed. Daniel's phone buzzed constantly. Reporters, lawyers, even a few federal contacts warning him to stay clear if he valued his license. Evan called just after 2 p.m., his voice low. "They've filed an injunction to freeze the drive you gave me. On paper, it's now classified evidence in an ongoing investigation, which means it disappears into a vault until someone higher up decides it doesn't exist." Lucas swore under his breath. "So we're back to zero." "Not quite," Evan said. "The ship was carrying more than just containers. There was a manifest in the captain's safe. It's coded, but I think you could break it." "If we can get that, we can tie the cargo directly to the man running this network." "Where's the manifest now?" "In a DHS field office downtown. And before you ask, no, you can't just walk in and ask nicely." Lucas almost smiled. "I wasn't planning to." That evening, Daniel's apartment became a war room. They spread out maps of the DHS building, security schedules Evan had passed along, and the few scraps of intel they still controlled. "We can't get through the main entrance," Daniel said. "Too many cameras and your face is everywhere." Lucas traced a finger along the blueprints. "There's a service corridor in the basement. Leads to evidence storage. If Evan can get us a 5-minute blackout on the cameras..." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You're really thinking about breaking into a federal building while the media paints you as a smuggler?" Lucas met his gaze. "If we don't, they win. And then all of this, Mateo's kidnapping, Harris's death, Raines' signature, it all gets buried." But they never got that far. At 9:17 p.m., as rain streaked the windows, the news shifted. The anchor's voice was urgent, almost triumphant. Vail International CEO Adrian Vail has just announced that new evidence proves the seized cargo was planted by an outside actor. The company is working closely with federal authorities to locate the suspect, identified as Lucas Moreno. The broadcast cut to footage from a press conference, Vail at the podium, Monica beside him, her expression the perfect blend of outrage and wounded dignity. "This man," Vail said, holding up a photo of Lucas, "betrayed his oath as a serviceman and abused his position within our company to harm innocent people and damage a reputable business. We will not rest until he is brought to justice." Flashes from cameras lit the stage. Lucas watched in silence, jaw clenched. Daniel turned down the volume. "They're not just defending themselves, they're hunting you now." The knock on the door came 30 minutes later. 3 sharp raps, followed by a pause. Daniel peeked through the peephole, then exhaled in relief. "It's Evan." The agent stepped inside quickly, rain dripping from his coat. "We've got a problem. Someone high up just issued a bolo for you, armed and dangerous. That means every cop in the city is now looking for an excuse to bring you in." Lucas's voice was flat. "So I either hide, or I end this before they find me." Evan dropped a sealed envelope on the table. "That's your way to end it. It's a list of every shipment Vail International's offshore subsidiaries have moved in the last year, along with the names of the shell companies. One of them ties directly to a private military contractor. Your old unit's contractor." Lucas's stomach tightened. "Which one?" Evan's eyes were hard. "Orion Strategic Solutions. The same group Raines was liaising with before he died." The name hit like a punch. Orion had been whispered about in the Navy. Off-book operations, plausible deniability, the kind of work you didn't admit to even in classified briefings. If they were the hidden hand behind Vail International's smuggling routes, then the whole network wasn't just criminal, it was militarized. They didn't get more than a few minutes to process it before a shout came from outside. "Federal agents! Open up!" Daniel swore under his breath. They must have tracked Evan's car. Lucas grabbed Mateo from the bedroom, keeping his voice calm. "Time to go, buddy." Evan moved to the back door. "I'll draw them off. You two get to the safe house I told you about, the one in Queens. Wait for me there." Lucas hesitated, but Evan's look was firm. "Go." They slipped out into the rain-soaked alley, the sound of pounding fists and shouted commands fading behind them. Lucas kept Mateo close, weaving through side streets until they reached an unmarked van Daniel had stashed 2 blocks away. As they pulled into the night, Lucas glanced back toward the glowing skyline. Somewhere in those towers, Monica and Adrian were watching the narrative turn in their favor, confident the tide had shifted. They were half right. The tide had shifted. But tides, Lucas knew, could turn again, fast and without warning. The safe house in Queens was nothing more than a narrow second-floor apartment above a shuttered bakery. It smelled faintly of flour and dust, and the blinds were kept drawn at all hours. Lucas paced the living room, every step measured. Mateo sat cross-legged on the couch with a comic book, pretending to read but stealing glances at his father. Daniel sat by the window, peering through a narrow gap in the blinds every few minutes. "Evan should have been here by now," Daniel said. Lucas didn't reply. His mind kept circling the same question. If Orion Strategic Solutions was really the hand behind Vail International's smuggling routes, who was pulling their strings? And why had Mason dropped Raines's name like a stone into deep water? The knock came just after noon. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. Evan's signal. Lucas opened the door to find the agent soaked from the rain, his jaw tight. He stepped inside, locking the door behind him. "They're moving tonight," Evan said. "Orion's board member, the one with ties to Vail, is in the city, meeting with the rest of the network at an undisclosed location." Daniel leaned forward. "You know where?" Evan's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I do now. Private conference suite, 53rd floor of the Halcyon Tower. Starts in 4 hours. If we get in, we get everyone in one room, Vail, Monica, the Orion contact, and the investors who've been bankrolling this for years." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "And you're suggesting we crash it?" "I'm suggesting," Evan said, "that we go in with enough proof to make it impossible for them to talk their way out. And the manifest from HBX 472 is that proof." Lucas frowned. "I thought DHS locked that down." "They did," Evan said. "But I still have a friend in evidence. She slipped me a copy before it vanished." The cargo wasn't just weapons, it was specialized targeting systems, the kind only military contractors use. And guess who signed the transfer authorization? Lucas felt the answer before he heard it. "Raines," Evan said. "Only... It's dated 3 weeks after his death." Daniel's head came up. "So someone's been forging his signature to keep the old Navy cover story alive." Lucas's voice was low. "And I think I know who." 4 hours later, the Halcyon Tower rose above them like a blade in the night sky, its mirrored surface reflecting the city lights. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble and glass, a small army of security stationed at every entrance. Evan had secured them cover IDs as logistics consultants for an Orion affiliate. The elevator ride to the 53rd floor felt like a slow ascent into enemy territory. When the doors opened, they stepped into a world of muted opulence, dark wood paneling, crystal decanters on a sideboard, and a long conference table surrounded by men and women in tailored suits. Adrian Vail sat halfway down the table, Monica Hale at his side. At the head sat a man Lucas had never seen before, late 60s, silver hair, posture ramrod straight. His presence commanded the room. Evan leaned toward Lucas and whispered, "That's General William Harrington, retired, and now Orion's chairman." Lucas's stomach turned. Harrington had been Raines's superior, the man who'd signed off on their final missions. The meeting was already underway, talk of schedule adjustments and asset protection filling the air. Lucas waited until Harrington's attention shifted to a set of papers in front of him, then moved forward and placed a small black case on the table. "This," Lucas said, "is everything you've been hiding. Shipping logs, transfer manifests, and the HBX 472 cargo list, all tied directly to Orion Strategic Solutions." The room went still. Monica's lips curved into a mocking smile. "Security!" But no one moved. Evan stepped forward, badge flashing. "Federal investigation. Everyone stays seated." Vale's face paled, but Harrington only leaned back in his chair, studying Lucas with cool detachment. "You've been busy, Moreno." Lucas's jaw tightened. "You used Raines's name to move shipments years after he was dead. You buried Harris and 3 others under the lie of an accident, and you've been running the same pipeline ever since." Harrington's gaze didn't waver. "You think this is about money? We built something the government couldn't. Untraceable supply lines, adaptable assets. It kept certain operations alive. It killed people," Lucas shot back. "Expendable assets," Harrington said, his voice like ice. "Including you." Evan opened the case, pulling out a small tablet and setting it to broadcast. On the screen, document after document scrolled. Contracts, emails, signed orders, all linking Vale International and Orion to illegal arms shipments. "This is already in the hands of federal prosecutors," Evan said. "And if anything happens to any of us, it goes public." For the first time, Harrington's expression shifted, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes. Vale looked ready to bolt, but 2 federal agents stepped into the room, weapons visible at their sides. Monica tried to speak, but Evan cut her off. "Monica Hale, Adrian Vale, you're both under arrest for conspiracy, trafficking, and obstruction of justice." The chaos that followed felt almost muted to Lucas. He watched as agents cuffed Monica and Vale, their protests swallowed by the scrape of chairs and the shuffle of feet. Harrington, however, didn't resist. He simply stood, straightened his jacket, and allowed the agents to lead him away. As they passed, Harrington leaned just close enough for Lucas to hear. "You think this ends with me? You've cut off one head. The body still moves." Lucas didn't respond. An hour later, Lucas stood outside the Halcyon Tower, the night air sharp in his lungs. Daniel emerged with Evan, both looking exhausted but satisfied. "It's over," Daniel said. "For now," Lucas replied. He glanced up at the tower's mirrored facade. "But Harrington's right. This was one branch. The roots go deeper." Evan clapped him on the shoulder. "We'll get the rest. But tonight, you took down the head of the snake." Lucas nodded, but his thoughts were already on Mateo, on getting his son out of the shadows this fight had dragged them into. Back at the safe house, Mateo was waiting. He ran to Lucas, wrapping his arms around his waist. "Is it done?" Lucas crouched to meet his eyes. "It's done for now. And you're safe." Mateo's gaze searched his father's face. "You promise?" Lucas hesitated, then pulled him close. "I promise I'll always fight to keep it that way." Photos of Monica Hale, Adrian Vale, and General William Harrington being led out of the Halcyon Tower in handcuffs filled every screen. Cable news anchors spoke in that mix of awe and scandal they saved for high-profile takedowns. Lucas watched it from the safehouse kitchen, the volume low so Mateo could sleep a little longer in the back room. The coffee in his cup had gone cold, but he kept it in his hands, something solid to ground him in a morning that felt unreal. Daniel stepped in from the hall, phone in hand. They've already frozen Orion's domestic accounts. The feds will take the rest apart piece by piece. Lucas gave a small nod. Good. That's one less shadow to worry about. Daniel hesitated. There's another offer on the table. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Evan spoke to DHS, Daniel said. They want you to head up an internal security unit. Clean house from the inside, root out any other networks still operating under the radar. They think your Navy background and what you've done here make you perfect for it. Lucas stared into his cup. Perfect, huh? It's a chance to keep fighting, Daniel pressed. On your terms this time. The offer should have felt like vindication. For years, Lucas had lived with the weight of Harris's death, the unanswered questions about Raines, the suspicion that he'd walked away from the Navy while the real enemy stayed in play. Now here was a way to take that enemy apart for good. But as the thought settled, so did the memory of Mateo's small hand gripping his in the drainage tunnel, the way his son's voice had trembled when he asked if it was done. Every time I go back into that world, Lucas said quietly, it takes more than it gives. And this time, I don't think I can afford the cost. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then what will you do? Lucas set the cup down. I'm going to give Mateo the life we've been running from. No more midnight calls. No more armed men in our kitchen. Just normal. Daniel nodded slowly, the respect in his eyes unspoken. They left the city 3 days later. It was a gray morning, the kind that made the skyline look like a fading photograph. Evan met them in the parking garage beneath the safe house, a plain sedan idling nearby. This should get you where you're going without drawing eyes, Evan said, handing over the keys. No plates in any database that matters. Lucas shook his hand. You're sure you'll be all right? Evan smirked. Please. I'm staying right here to make the rest of Harrington's friends miserable. Somebody's got to enjoy the cleanup. Mateo climbed into the back seat, clutching a battered backpack and his favorite comic book. As Lucas started the engine, Evan tapped the roof twice, a silent goodbye. They drove north, trading skyscrapers for bare winter trees. Hours passed with only the hum of the road and the occasional question from Mateo, where they were going, whether there'd be a school nearby, if the new place had a yard. By late afternoon, they pulled into a small town Lucas hadn't seen in years. The main street was quiet, lined with brick storefronts and a diner that looked unchanged from the 80s. At the edge of town stood a 2-story house with peeling paint and a wide porch. It had belonged to Lucas's uncle, a man who'd passed away quietly while Lucas was deployed. No one had lived there since. Mateo hopped out of the car, running up the porch steps. It smells like wood in here, he called as Lucas unlocked the door. Better than the city, Lucas said, stepping inside. The first week passed in slow rhythms, fixing the porch railing, clearing the gutters, buying groceries from the same market every few days. Mateo started at the local school and came home talking about a science project involving paper rockets. Lucas found himself waking before dawn out of habit, but instead of checking locks and scanning the street, he made coffee and sat on the porch, watching the town wake up. One morning, a small package arrived with no return address. Inside was an old Navy-issue wristwatch, Harris's watch, the same one Lucas had carried in a box for years. This time, though, the band had been repaired, the face polished. Beneath it was a note in Evan's blocky handwriting. For the man who kept his word. Some wars you fight. Some you walk away from. Both take courage. Lucas closed his hand around the watch, the weight of it steady and familiar. Spring crept in slowly. The bare trees outside the kitchen window began to bud. The air softened, and the days stretched longer. One evening, Lucas and Mateo sat on the porch steps. the sky streaked with orange and purple.
"Do you miss it?"
Mateo asked suddenly.
"Miss what?" "The Navy, the missions, the stuff you used to do."
Lucas thought for a moment. "I miss the people, the ones who had my back. I don't miss the part where I didn't know if I'd make it home." Mateo nodded as if that made perfect sense. Lucas glanced at him. "You know, it's not about running away. It's about choosing what's worth running toward. Right now, that's you." Mateo's smile was small but sure. "Then I'm glad you walked away." Weeks later, Lucas found himself back in the yard, sanding the porch railing he'd repaired months earlier. He paused, listening to Mateo's laughter drift from somewhere inside the house. The battles were behind him now, not because the world had run out of wars, but because he'd finally learned which ones were worth fighting and which ones were worth leaving. He slipped Harris's watch onto his wrist, the second hand ticking steady in the quiet. Somewhere far away, Adrian Vale, Monica Hale, and Harrington would be sitting in windowless rooms, their empires dismantled piece by piece. Lucas had played his part in that. But his real victory was here, in this small house, with a boy who could finally sleep through the night without fear. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Lucas leaned back against the porch post, the cool air settling around him. Some wars were fought with guns, others with the courage to walk away. To everyone who stayed with Lucas Moreno's journey from the first mop stroke on the 42nd floor to the final quiet evening on that porch, thank you. This story was never just about uncovering smuggling routes or taking down powerful names. It was about the weight of the past, the choices that define us, and the courage it takes to protect what matters most. Lucas's battles may have played out in corporate towers and rain-soaked docks, but the heart of his fight was always for his son, for a life free from fear. Your time, your attention, and your willingness to follow this path mean more than I can say. Every view, every moment you spend here breathes life into these characters and their struggles. May we all find the strength to walk away from the battles that don't serve us, and the resolve to stand firm in the ones that do. Thank you for being part of this story.